Hi, everyone, and many thanks for joining us. I'm Caitlin Rubin, Associate Curator and Director of Programs here at the Rose Art Museum, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight with all of you and with Gannit Ankori, the Rose's Henry and Lois Foster Director and Chief Curator. We're excited to spend some time taking you through part of our current exhibition titled Recollections, 6 Decades at the Rose Art Museum. First, of course, a few notes. Tonight's program does have live closed captioning, and you can enable or disable this feature by clicking the closed caption button, which is CC, on your screen. Because this is auto-generated, we do know that there will be some inaccuracies within this transcript. We're also recording this program and we'll be correcting the accompanying captions before the video is posted online. This evening, we extend special thanks to Brandeis alumni Amy and Frank Lindy. Their generous support of the Rose's programming amplifies and emboldens the dialogues we're able to foster both in and beyond the museum's galleries. I know that many of you have visited the Rose in the past months, and I hope that many more will make the trip to the museum following tonight's session. As those of you who have walked through the galleries with us know, providing a quick tour of this show is frankly just impossible. There are always too many works to talk about and too little time. So tonight we've prepared a very focused tour. It will begin to unpack some of the larger themes and threads of the exhibition. But with this, we've also included as many photos as we could possibly cram into one PowerPoint, just to give you a glimpse at everything we're not going to be able to cover tonight in our hour together. Following our virtual tour, we'll take some time to answer questions about the exhibition and of course our work at the Rose as well. And you can submit these using the Q&A box within Zoom.
So thank you, Caitlin, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Tonight we will share just a few highlights from the first 2 galleries of our museum-wide exhibition, Recollections. But first, a few contextual notes. So the history of Brandeis University and the Rose Art Museum carved a bold and luminous trajectory that brought us here today. Established in 1948 as a university that would accept all qualified students, faculty, and staff, regardless of race, sex, or creed, during a time of discrimination, biases, and exclusions, Brandeis was ahead of its time. Founded not only on the values of academic excellence, like the Ivy Leagues, etc., but also Brandeis was devoted to the promotion of social justice and inclusion from its very inception. The first graduating class celebrated commencement about 70 years ago with a Festival of the Arts, a display of cutting-edge music, dance, performances, and art brought together by Leonard Bernstein, Brandeis Professor of Music, and the inaugural head of the School of the Arts. And the significance of the creative arts was further established with the foundation of the Rose Art Museum in 1961. So yes, 6 months ago in June, we marked our 60th anniversary. Now, from the beginning, the vision for the Rose was as a center for artists, creativity, innovations, and engagement. So just as Brandeis diverged from the path of other universities, the Rose too was unlike any other university museum. Instead of collecting 1 or 2 items from each culture or epoch for teaching purposes, even if the quality of the items was not top-notch, imagine 1961, who could possibly get a good Renaissance painting or anything at all. But the Rose, from the beginning, devoted itself to the new, the now, and the next. The first legendary director, Sam Hunter, together with Brandeis's founding president, Abe Sacker, you see them in the picture, they received the Gewirtz-Minuchin donation of $50,000. With that, they proceeded to acquire what very few people were collecting at the time, that is contemporary art, with a cap of $5,000 per artwork. Well, the contemporary art of the 1960s, which they purchased often directly off of the walls of the artist studios, forged the foundation of the Rose Art Museum's stellar, unparalleled collection. Our iconic pieces, acquired but also gifted during the 1960s, the first decade of the museum's existence, which have by now become part of the canon of post-war art, include, for example, the abstract expressionism of Willem de Kooning.
And what was in 1962 a very transgressive pop painting by Roy Lichtenstein, who here borrows some visual vocabulary from comic books, at this time kind of introducing this fluidity between so-called high and low visual culture.
They got Andy Warhol's powerful and provocative silkscreen that interrogates the fissures, violence, voyeurism, and sensationalism of American life, and much more.
Of course, our much loved Ellsworth Kelly, which represented a new approach to painting and to geometric abstraction.
And Ellsworth Kelly received an honorary doctorate and came to Brandeis, which was a very special occasion. We also have Robert Indiana's Calamay from 1961, our foundational year. It came to the Rose 1 year after the artist took on the name of his home state, Indiana, and the year when he actually began to paint circles and insert words into his paintings.
Like the work of so many artists that Sam Hunter collected during those early years, Robert Rauschenberg's second time painting pushes the definition of painting itself, joining everyday materials, which you can see here, with the traditional unexpected strokes of paint, and capturing, even within a still work, the sense of the performative actions that came into it when it was created. And Gannit, the next slide.
Yeah.
And so finally, Marisol was notably the only woman artist whose work was brought into the Rose collection as part of that first acquisition fund, the Gewürzminuten purchase. And as you'll see, we chose to give this work, Ruth, a very prominent place in the opening gallery of recollections.
You see her there, right there. So yes, and all of these iconic works are currently on view at the Rose, placed in meaningful dialogues with new acquisitions by lesser known or previously marginalized artists. You see some of them here in this installation shot. Organized in celebration of the Rose's 60th anniversary and curated by Caitlin, myself, together with our wonderful colleague, Dr. Lyon J. Hill, the Rose guest curator for African and African diaspora art. The exhibition Recollection casts a critical eye in two different directions. We look back at the radical roots from which the museum grew and ahead towards the potential for future transformations. And following the examples of the artists that the exhibition features, our curatorial vision challenges art historical conventions, traditional categories, and cultural hierarchies. Instead, we want to chart alternative genealogies that link diverse and unexpected artworks drawn from our museum's permanent collection. And so here you see the Feinberg Gallery. When you come in, all around, you see here our first wall, and we are met by very famous artists, your friends, Picasso and Gauguin, but on equal footing between them and in dialogue with them, we have a really magnificent Beaufort Delaney painting from 1950. The work was donated to the museum decades ago, but has never been on view until now. And it was quite thrilling to first conserve the work, and now when it's in pristine condition, to share it with our audiences. So Reclining Nude is one of Picasso's many works in which the 53-year-old artist painted 17-year-old Marie-Thérèse Walter, his model, mistress, and mother of his daughter. He utilizes, as you can see, post-cubist innovations, but he painted a very traditional theme, the reclining nude, accentuating Marie-Thérèse Walter's sexuality, rendering her as a passive object of his own very active male gaze and desire. Analogously, Gauguin's Tahitian figure presents the artist's own projected fantasies. So in 1891, Gauguin, as you know, left Europe seeking an imagined paradise lost in Tahiti. To his disappointment, when he arrived, he found a Francophile settlement overtaken by colonial and missionary rule and ways of life. Nothing of the kind of indigenous Tahitian fantasies that he had, but still attempting to find the romanticized, primordial, sensual Tahiti of his dreams, the 43-year-old Gauguin claimed a 14-year-old Tahitian girl as his wife and lived with her in what he called a native hut. And that's a quote from his memoirs, in the countryside. In Tahiti, and for the rest of his life, Gauguin made art that aspired to, quote, get back to the ancient hearth, end of quote. And when he returned to France in 1893, he created many, kind of an imaginary pantheon of Tahitian figures, like the one in the Roses collection, which is a young woman, perhaps his wife or the girl, the teenager he was living with. He crafted it in clay, then cast it in bronze, and as a kind of fragment, and we have it on view in the Rose now. Now between these two, we have Beaufort Delaney. Whereas Gauguin and Picasso are household names, Beaufort Delaney and his artistic achievements have until recently been overlooked. Delaney's mother, and some of it has to do with contexts which the curatorial team supplies in our labels. Delaney's mother, who was born into slavery and never learned how to read or write, worked to ensure that her children learn the value of an education and also understand the racist injustices of America. Interested in studying art, Delaney moved from Tennessee to Boston. Later, in New York City, he led a divided life as an openly gay artist within the avant-garde scene in Greenwich Village, where he lived and worked on Green Street, which is the title of his work, but also in the evenings was an active member of the Black cultural renaissance uptown in Harlem, where he was a mentor to the young novelist James Baldwin. As his political convictions deepened, Delaney was unable to reconcile the racism, homophobia, and social conflicts he faced in the United States. Like many others, he moved to Paris, where he lived as an expatriate, but his financial and mental well-being deteriorated, and he died while hospitalized within a French institution. So Picasso and Gauguin are well known. Delaney, whose life story is different, is only now being recognized for his artistic genius and influence. I want you to note that this beautiful painting shares with Picasso's work the oscillation between abstraction and figuration. And maybe I can show it this way so you can see the relationship. Also, the color scheme is similar, but Delaney's work also conjures up the vibrant community to which he belonged, pulsating with kind of rhythms of jazz. We now move virtual tour, so please walk with us as we move forward in the Feinberg Gallery. We move to our next pairing, where we place de Kooning and Colescott side by side, as suggested by Colescott himself. So Colescott, which we see was influenced not by our abstract de Kooning, but by the de Kooning specific Woman One from MoMA, New York. And in his work, he deliberately mimics and mocks the gestural brushstrokes of de Kooning while citing de Kooning's famed painting, Woman One. Colescott melds subversive humor and art historical irreverence and to blatantly address the racism and sexism embedded in visual culture and society at large. So you see, he modifies de Kooning's original protagonist by masking her face with the features of the mammy, the anti-Black racist caricature of Black womanhood. He does so in a deliberately cartoonish style. So this is a very provocative work. The title of the work suggests the phrasing of a Black Southern vernacular, alluding to de Kooning, and the title is "I Gets a Thrill Too When I Sees de Koo," and a lot of double entendre there. So Colescott was born into a multiracial family who at first hid their Blackness, at least some of them, and part of his journey was to determine his identity within a society divided along racial lines. His provocative paintings tackle difficult issues of racism, racial passing, interracial desire, and the struggle of finding a unique artistic voice, which is a theme that Caitlin will pick up on later. Recent conservation work on this painting revealed that Colescott gave an alternate title to the work, penciled on its stretcher and written in parentheses between the first title. And I quote, it says, I get a thrill too when I sees de Koo, and then in parentheses, it says, integrated de Kooning. So he painted the work at a time when integration efforts in the 70s, including busing and other attempts to desegregate public schools in Boston and elsewhere, were met with white protest, violent pushback, and vitriolic opposition. Now, the mammy figure that we see in Colescott painting that is very disturbing and meant to be disturbing, had already appeared in 1981, you see it here, in Andy Warhol's Polaroid. His portrait of a specific African-American woman, her name is Sylvia Williams, shows that he dressed her up and had her perform the identity of the mammy. That is, take an individual woman and transform her into a racial stereotype. The photo served as the basis for a print that was part of Warhol's 1981 portfolio titled Myths. And the portfolio comprised of 10 prints, included an image of Mammy alongside Uncle Sam, Superman, Mickey Mouse, and others, figures that Warhol identified as cornerstones of American culture. But the most prominent work within this grouping of three works that deal with the mammy is by far Betty Saar's incredible supreme quality, that you see it faces you when you enter the museum. It's the first thing that you see. The large quote on the wall also amplifies her words. Now, we allow her visually and through her amplified quotes to respond to the work of Colescott and Warhol and address the misogynism and racism embedded within the Mammy figure. So Betty Saar, and here, I want to acknowledge that our colleague, Eliane Hill, took the lead on writing a lot of what we're saying here, being an African American woman herself. So what we say is that Betty Saar thought deeply about the reuse of the Mammy figure before she began to incorporate this image within her work. She herself explains, and I quote Betty Saar here, "I had a lot of hesitation about using powerful negative images such as these, thinking about how white people saw Black people and how that influenced the ways in which Black people saw each other." And Saar, like many of the others, others featured in recollections, recognized the damaging impact of seeing oneself through the eyes of others and the importance of self-representation as a way to reclaim identities molded by damaging stereotypes and white supremacist values. So the figure of the Mammy occupied a central place in the lore of the Old South, and it illustrates racial oppression and class identity. As many of you know, in the early 20s, the Mammy became immortalized as Aunt Jemima, the spokesperson for a line of breakfast products and a visual representation of the normalized exploitation of the domestic labor of Black women. But in her sculpture, this that you see before you, Supreme Quality, Saar emphasized African-American women's histories by mounting a found image of the Mammy figure on a washboard once used for hand washing laundry, a back-breaking labor that a lot of was employed by Black women, domestic slaves, first slaves and then domestic laborers. On the reverse side of the board, as you see here, a clock whose hands have been replaced by an American flag suggests the unending labor of Black women on whose backs much of the United States was built. Crucially, Saar reclaims the Mammy figure as a warrior, and she arms her here, you see, with both weapons, but also with the words, "Extreme times call for extreme heroines," and she transforms her into a warrior. Now, so this really conflates the white stereotype with ideas and imagery of the Black Power movement. And just to say that both in front and in the back here on this piece of soap, it says "Liberate Aunt Jemima." So Saar kind of wants to rehabilitate or take back a figure crafted through the lens of racism and to make her a heroine who fights these very forces of racism.
So in these installation shots, you saw behind the Betty Saar, the Robert Indiana that we mentioned kind of at the start of this presentation. Here you, of course, see Ruth this great work by Marisol in center place within the gallery. And I think you can tell from how Gannit has shared the voices of the artists in this show. Something you might not be able to see within these installation images is that we also chose to highlight artists' quotes on the walls. And we really wanted to make, as a team, it felt important to make the artist's voice primary and to think very clearly and deeply about how we might be able to amplify the work of those who had largely been excluded from prior understandings of what we term art history. So SAR reclaimed elements of a visual language that was forged by a racist society to make a work that spoke to and of a different audience. And across from this work, across the gallery, we chose to install a video by Howardina Pindell, a work that we view as being in dialogue with the fierce warrior of SAR's supreme quality, in a way extending the conversation from represented experience to an experience that is directly articulated and then voiced by the artist herself. Some of you may be familiar with Howardina Pindell's practice, as we at the Rose have twice presented her work in major retrospectives, once in the 1990s and then again more recently in 2019. Pindell is incredible and a very worthy recipient of an honorary degree from Brandeis, which was given to her in 2020. In addition to her pioneering work as an artist, she's recognized as being the first Black woman curator at the Museum of Modern Art, a co-founder of the influential feminist cooperative AIR, or AIR Gallery, and a fierce advocate for equity within the art world. Free Whitten 21 is kind of amazingly Pindell's first ever video work. And it's also her first work to engage directly with the racism and sexism she encountered and challenged her over the years, from a very young student to an undergraduate at Boston University and later within her professional life. In this video, and we're going to show you a short clip of this momentarily, Pindell alternately voices her own experiences with prejudice and then, performing the role of a privileged white woman, dismisses these lived experiences and also minimizes the pain that they inflicted. So Gannit, let's see if we can pull this up.
A complaint, perhaps to a parent who did not know that I was Black. Perhaps the child did not know or had not learned to differentiate race at that time. I later found out that that teacher was fired. To a high school in Philadelphia, which was for girls, which emphasized academic achievement. Everyone was very competitive with one another for grades. I did very well in the history classes and asked that my history teacher put me in the accelerated class. She told me she would be happy with my grades to put me in the accelerated level. However, she felt that a white student with lower grades would go further. Therefore, she would not put me in the accelerated course. You know, you really must be paranoid. Those things never happened to me. I don't know anyone who's had those things happen to them. But then, of course, they're Free Whitten 21, so they wouldn't have that kind of experience. I went to Boston University, and for my first year, I lived in a dormitory. I was entered as a freshman student in January.
So we're skipping ahead just for the sake of time, and I'd encourage you to seek this video out online or, of course, come to the Rose to see it in person. Elsewhere, as you can see, Pindell wraps and then unwraps bandages from around her head, suggesting the experience or the presence of a wound or some trauma. More specifically, these bandages may allude to a car accident that Pindell survived in 1979, the year before filming this work. It was a near-death experience for her. And though she had already developed a formal voice of her own, working primarily in the realm of abstraction, the injuries she suffered and kind of the way that it caused her to rethink her life, it was a pivot for her. It was a motivation for her to more closely join her art and her activism. So moving further down the gallery wall brings us to, as you can see, centered across from the railing, this monumental painting by Jack Whitten, who is another artist who developed a voice all his own and intentionally counter to the prevailing influences of the time in which he was working. During his visits to the Rose, and this is like a tour of the honorary degree recipients of Brandeis, because Jack also received an honorary degree from Brandeis University. But during his many visits to the Rose, Jack Whitten discussed how he had to prune the influence of de Kooning, who he knew well within the New York art scene, in order to discover a mode of painting that more truly expressed his own identity as a Black male artist. Or as he said in his words, quote, "I had to break de Kooning's abstract expressionist control of my hand," end quote. So he made the tools to do so. We have a photo of this. Whitten used these so-called developers. Oh, do we not have a photo? I'll describe it for you. He used these so-called developers, which were essentially these large metal or rubber squeegees that he would pull across the surface of his painting. He referenced them. He said that there was almost like an enlarged afro comb or pick, and you can see the way that the teeth made an impression on the surface of this work. So in pulling across these layers of paint that had been built up over the canvas, he would then expose color that had been embedded beneath those further within the painting. And in calling it a developer, he was intentionally drawing an alignment between his painting practice and a practice of photography, the experience of going into the dark room and developing something and not quite knowing what the image would look like until that process had been completed. So he removed the hand and he made a tool that was more linked to his own lived experience. So where we've installed this, and you can see in this photo, we actually chose to install it directly across from this de Kooning painting on the opposite side of the gallery. And this, we're taking you through the show in a very specific way tonight, but it was important to us that we not narrow the ways of interacting with or interpreting the Rose collection, but instead open up the possibility for many different and overlapping ways of experiencing it. So just as the de Kooning is in conversation with Colescott, as Gannit explained, it can also be seen in dialogue with this Jack Whitten. We didn't want to flatten the show into a linear exercise, but instead we thought of this installation as clusters of works that speak to one another across the galleries, even across separate galleries, inviting the possibility for new pathways and for layered connections across the collection. And with that, we're going to walk our way downstairs to the lower rows.
Right. And there's so much more to say, and we're really holding back. So you have to come and look for yourselves, because every single work we talked about, there's much more to say about specific works, but also the various dialogues. So when we move from the Feinberg Gallery to the lower rows, the section is called Retellings. And you immediately see a different ambiance, lower ceiling, gray walls, dim lights, and a very different viewing experience that relates to the themes we explore. Actually, the theme generally are the layered traumas that are documented by photojournalists and expressed by visual artists. And many of them contain personal and collective histories laden with tragedy, sorrow, and pain. This gallery is highly diverse in terms of the time works were created, the place, the artistic genre, and the works, all of them kind of share a subdued palette of somber tones, but also this sense of resilience and compassion. The specific experiences are broader than the American experience, which dominated the Feinberg Gallery. And we do have civil rights and racial justice in America, but also the Holocaust, the Spanish Civil War, HIV/AIDS epidemic, colonialist exploitations of South Africa, gender inequality, and the Atlantic slave trade, which some of them we will see now. But as we move, we encounter a connection between these Danny Lyon photographs and some contemporary works like this video by Jatovia Gary or a Villa Longo painting So it was really, really important for us to show these Danny Lyon photographs from, most of them from 1963. And here a shout out to our sponsors who also donated this incredible treasure trove of photographs, the Lindys. So within the first 10 years, the Rose distinguished itself as a museum that focused on contemporary art. But Lyon, Caitlin, and I were asking ourselves what was happening outside the museum. And as you all know, the world was in turmoil and America was in turmoil. The 1960s were a time, this is an understatement, of extreme social unrest, violence, and war. Protests engulfed not just the streets, but also campuses across the country, including Brandeis University. It was an important hub of activism. And the 1960s photographs by Danny Lyon shown for the first time at the Rose Art Museum highlight what some of the artworks that were collected during the first decade do not show, and actually kind of obfuscate. So this is the wall, one of the walls. This is only, we have 3 other Lyon photographs on view. Danny Lyon, after he graduated from the University of Chicago, joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. It was an interracial political organization that used direct action tactics to advocate for racial equity and fight white supremacism and oppression. As a SNCC staff photographer, Lyon documented the activism of the civil rights movement, but also the why such activism was necessary. So a lot of images that reflect the racism, especially in the South, the violence and the sadness of this image. And this one is that when our students see them, they think they're contemporary images. They think they were taken just in the last years, showing that that activism is very much needed, and that resistance still goes on. The works that we have on view also have amazing portraits of the courage and grace of the movement's leaders. But you know, when we show this, Lyon himself was aware that the reason that he could be the SNCC photographer and go out and captures these images was because he had privileges that his colleagues who were Black did not. He said, you know, I could go out and take pictures. Any of my African-American colleagues would immediately be arrested if they were on the street. And Caitlin, I thought you would.
Yeah, I'll just put in a little, I'll chime in to say that recently in the fall, we hosted a really wonderful conversation between Danny Lyon and the Brandeis students that Gannit mentioned, where they were able to be in dialogue with Danny and ask him what it was like to be an activist and a photographer who was very much making these works around the same time, the same age that they currently are as students. And it was a wonderfully rich conversation. It's in the process of being edited for being posted online. So check back soon if you'd like to take a look at that.
Right. Also, we included some high school students from Waltham, which is our community as well. So the rest of the gallery, you see the Danny Lyon works here, is very rich with powerful works. The Holocaust, the lynch fragments, Kat Kollwitz's Mother and Dead Child. We can't talk about them now, but you have to come and see. The elegies by Motherwell, wonderful self-portrait by a South African artist, Mohau Modigesand, and incredible self-portrait by Renee Cox, and another Betty Saar here. All of these works are really, really worth viewing. But I want to focus on this installation by Radcliffe Bailey that really anchors this, the Lower Rose Gallery. And Radcliffe Bailey, just a sneak peek, next week, he will be in conversation with our colleague, Eliane Hill. So stay tuned. It promises to be really thrilling to hear him talk about this work as it relates to other, to his artistic practice in general. So Storm at Sea from 2007. It's composed of loose, dismantled piano keys. And they form a kind of turbulent waters, billowing waves, a stormy sea, as the title indicates. Though they no longer perform their original musical functions, the piano is dismantled, they do resound in new amplified ways, arcing between a dark slave ship and an African sculpture. The repurposed keys voice a visual lament. Cascading across the gallery floor, they evoke the histories of Black individuals who have been kidnapped, enslaved, and forced into passage across the Atlantic Ocean. They could also evoke the bones of those who tragically drowned at sea, their lives cut short before they reached American shores. For many Black Americans descended from enslaved Africans, the violence of the slave trade and the trauma of these waters continue to separate them from knowledge of their homelands and cultures from which their ancestors were so violently uprooted. Bailey, who was in search for his own family roots and cultural heritage at the time he made this work, recognized the loose piano keys as a form of DNA, each one the marker of a note within songs they once carried. His rearrangement builds upon the layered sounds and traditions of Black music to create a new composition. And this energy, I just want to say, of fragmentation on the one hand, but also a resilience that brings artists to building new creations on the other, is something that starts here and is amplified in the next galleries. The African sculpture that you see here perched amid the wreckage is a replica, and this was important for Bailey to stress that he wasn't using an actual holy or an original African sculpture. It's a replica of an Oshe Shango, a Yoruba dance staff, which the artist purchased in the United States. This handheld sculpture honors Shango, the Yoruba spirit of thunder and lightning. The double axe motif symbolizes the thunderbolts that Shango hurls to the earth, while the arc above his head represents the vital force that flows through the body, a storm of energy to match the one at sea. Referencing Yoruba spiritual imagery, the musical and material histories of the African diaspora, Bailey's work points to great distances already traveled while anticipating journeys that are yet to come, as the show itself looks backward and forward to the past and to the future. Caitlin?
Yeah, I mean, if you actually just go back to that shot, I love this image because you see here the dismantled piano keys, and then behind it on the wall, you see this fantastic painting by Jenny C. Jones, also a very recent acquisition. And as I said when we were upstairs in the Feinberg Gallery, we really thought about there being many different threads throughout this show. There's not just one way of seeing this show, and there's not just one way of creating connections or interpreting all the works that we've put on view, which is just a fraction of the collection. And one of those kind of sub-themes is music. And that's a cue that we really took from the artists that we chose to put in the show. But we realized that here you have the piano keys, and Jenny is also using actually the material of sound, of music making. Here she's presenting visual and oral experiences as intertwined. So what you see, this is a work called Tempo Largo, Marking Dark Time. There's this darker square at the top of this work, and that's actually an acoustic panel. So the sound absorbing woven fabric, it's stretched across a kind of fiberglass frame that would actually dampen sound if you were playing within a practice studio, for example. There is within this work actually an auditory quality. As you get closer, sound becomes quieter when you're next to this work. It's placed across more of a traditional stretched canvas that Jenny has painted black, but at the bottom you'll see there's a strip of piano felt. So it's this ready-made black that kind of mingles with the hues that she's applied through paint. As you can see, her title, Tempo Largo, references a musical kind of notation. And so on a score, this would indicate that piece should be played slower, at a slower pace. But I think that for us as viewers, it also cues us to slow down and to linger a bit in front of this work. The sub-parenthetical title, Marking Dark Time, is significant here. And you can see also that this was a work that, as I said, it was a recent acquisition, acquired in 2021 and made in 2020. And so in fact, this was one of the first works that Jenny made in her studio at the start of the pandemic in spring 2020. And so saying Marking Dark Time, I feel like for those of us who have experienced it ourselves, in those early months and even now, the tempo of time and life seems to modulate very unpredictably. And she describes this period as one of intense mourning, of being alone, of working with the material she had, and of her painting practice as a way to really process her grief. I believe in the next slide, Gannit.
Yeah, I'm just cognizant of the time that we only have 10 minutes left. So I think
we can do it.
I'll just take it from here so that we can get some questions. Oh, you wanted to talk about elegy?
Yeah, I just wanted to make note of the fact that that we have, of course, elegy across the way, which is in conversation. And just to say quickly that as we kind of take our cues from artists, as I said, we wanted to really think about the way that we could pace and modulate and grow our show in a way that the artists also encourage us in their musical kind of references. So just like we saw kind of like the big splash of color in the Feinberg, and Gannit mentioned this descending into the lower gallery where things become quieter, the gray walls, the kind of more the quieter hues, the white, the gray, the black, and the more intimate scale. Radcliffe Bailey's Storm at Sea with those piano keys was really for us a crescendo, a visual crescendo that led you from this smaller space, this quieter space, through in this arc to the Foster Gallery, which we won't be able to get into depth right now, but you can see that we felt that in hanging this Mark Bradford work right through these doors, we wanted you to feel uplifted, to be kind of raised to this level and feel perhaps like you were enveloped within a painting as you walked through those doors.
Right. So this is the first two galleries. And when you walk in, this is the very large and stunning and redesigned Lois Foster wing, which will be the subject of our next virtual tour later this spring. So I hope you join us in person for this, and I hope you come to the museum. February 10th is when we reopen the Foster Wing with several new shows. We both have a lot more to say, and it's all written out as a nice crescendo and ta-dam for an ending, but we will try to restrict ourselves and just move to thank you and to tell you briefly what's coming up next and open it to questions. So thank you for joining us. When we open on February 10th, you will not only be able to see the entirety of Recollections again, there will be 2 new exhibitions and a special display. We open My Mechanical Sketchbook, Barclay L. Hendricks and Photography, which we are currently installing. Lyon is my co-curator on this as well. The second show is a video show by an Israeli-born Palestinian artist, a video called Strangeness. The show is called Displaced, Raida Adon's Strangeness. And happy to say that although we had to deinstall Frida Kahlo Pose, some of the private collectors lend us 3 self-portrait paintings and some photographs by Frida Kahlo for another year. So it'll be Frida Kahlo at the Rose Art Museum will also be in the Foster. And I turn it to Caitlin to talk about the programs.
Yeah, if you do have any questions, just feel free to pop them in the Q&A while we're wrapping up with this kind of preview. But we do have 2 exciting programs to highlight upcoming. So next week, on Wednesday, as Gannit mentioned, we'll have Radcliffe Bailey in conversation with Dr. Eliane Hill. That will be fantastic. Please do register on the Rose's website if you're interested in joining. And then early next month, we have an encore presentation of a really special program we had with Alok. This is a program that will be available for limited viewing only for 2 weeks time. So please do tune in if you're interested in seeing it.
Okay, so I see one question about Radcliffe Bailey's installation and how we move around the sculpture. So I love these hands-on questions. The piece which we also acquired this last year, very recently, it's one of our new acquisitions. The piano keys actually come very, very neatly put in these plastic containers, the ones that our students bring to the dorm. And the ship and the sculpture that you see here are actually wrapped up and created like artworks. And some of the piano keys are loose, like singles. Some are still together, meshed together. And what we did was we worked with the artist to think about how we place them. It's a flexible kind of installation that's very site specific. So we marked it where we wanted it to be. And then we actually looked at photographs that we had and very visceral experienced. I put on the gloves and I actually helped the crew build this billowing waves and then put in together. When we deinstall, we will put everything back. Shout out to our Deputy Director of Exhibitions and Collections, Anna Kovacs, who is the most professional person ever. And when dealing with the collection, we will make sure that we store it in a really secure way.
I think this actually relates to another question in terms of when we might deinstall things, how long is the exhibition open? And so that's something we didn't get to detail, but the show will actually be up, Recollections will be up for 3 years as a really special moment to mark our 60th anniversary, but it's going to be up with numerous activations, changes, rotations, and insertions of new work. So some works will remain on view for a longer period of time, some of those major installations, and other things you'll have to come back to keep up with everything that we bring in to the galleries. There was also a comment about wanting a longer tour, and I just want to say that we will, it's not up on our website, but we will be doing part 2 of this tour later this spring. So come back.
So thank you, Daniel Gordon, for telling us that it's a great acquisition. I agree with you completely. The reference to reopening February 10th is confusing. We have temporarily closed the Foster wing to deinstall Frida Kahlo Pose and to install the new display of Kahlo and our new exhibition, Barclay Hendricks and Photography, My Mechanical Sketchbook. So just for a brief time, the museum is open, but the Foster wing, you can see it from, you can see it, but you can't enter it. And on February 10th, the newly installed exhibitions will be up, so you will be able to visit the entire museum. The website and our announcements did say that the Foster was temporarily closed for installation. I'm sorry, Jane, that you missed that, but very, very soon we will be reopening and we will have a lot to see, a lot to see. So Linda asks if we can put the part of the talk that we didn't include for reference because you want to hear us talk more. Caitlin and I will be sure to include anything we missed in our upcoming virtual tour. We're also in the process of having making these little clips that will be online. We're also launching a museum app, a Rose Museum app that is called Museum, where you'll be able to access all our wall texts, all our everything, all the information. We're eager to share our knowledge. Everything is also translated into Spanish. So, and the Rose, I have to say, is always free to all. So the idea of having a museum that's accessible to everyone, that's open, and also that you are part of the meaning-making process. One of the things that we didn't have a chance to say that was very important to us is that if you look at the way that we constructed this gallery, anyone can make their own path, link works that sometimes we didn't even think about together. And the idea is not to reiterate a rehearsed master narrative of Western art or to illustrate the canon once again, but rather to, with your help and the help of the artists and the artworks, to produce new knowledge that will teach us more, not just about art, but about our lives. It's 8 o'clock. Thank you, Caitlin, for always being there for me and for us.
Thank you, Gannit, and thank you, everyone. It was nice to be with you, even if we couldn't see your faces, but we felt your presence. And as Gannit said, we hope to see you for part 2, our tour of the Foster Gallery of Recollections, and we hope to see you at future programs even next week. Until then, have a good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.